Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Chicago's Zooming with the Alderman series of interviews. My name is Judy Schindler. Founded 101 years ago, right here in Chicago, the League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. One of the ways we do this is by increasing public understanding of major public policy issues and influencing those policies through education and advocacy. The League is now includes hundreds of local chapters all over the country. These interviews with the aldermen are part of our efforts to educate people about the officials who set the policies and ordinances that govern us here in Chicago. Today, our guest is Alderwoman Maria Hadden of the 49th Ward. Welcome, Alder Hadden. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Please know that the Zoom session is being recorded and will be available to viewers after today on the League's website. We'll be sending Alder Hadden and everyone who registered a link to the video when it becomes available. Also, everyone should know that we provided the Alderwoman with a copy of the questions I'll be asking ahead of time. Before starting on those questions, though, let's take a look at the map of all the 50 wards in Chicago. So now the cursor will show you where the 50th is. The 49th, I'm sorry, I meant the 49th. And could you show us, zero in now on the map of the 49th Ward? So Alder Hadden, could you describe your ward, where it is and what are the main boundaries?
Absolutely. So the 49th Ward is located in the furthest northeast corner of the city. We are bounded to the east by the beautiful Lake Michigan and have lots of wonderful public beaches to show for it. To the north, our boundary is Evanston, the city of Evanston. To the south, we go as far south as Devon, and you'll see a few places on the map there where we are north of Devon. And then to the west, you can see the bulk of the ward stops at Ridge Avenue, but some goes as far as Western Avenue. Yes.
And what neighborhoods does this include?
So this includes the neighborhoods of Rogers Park, mainly what people think of as East Rogers Park, some of West Rogers Park, and little bits of West Ridge as well. But predominantly, most of what the official community areas think of Rogers Park, almost all of it is in the 49th Ward.
And would you say, what is the makeup? Is it residential, commercial, industrial?
Sure. So we are overwhelmingly residential. I think in prior decades, we might have even been described as a bedroom community, right? So on the outskirts of the city, far from downtown, very residential. So we're pretty geographically small, very residentially dense. Some single family homes, but lots of 2 flats, 6 flats, larger apartment buildings and condos. We're about 75% renter right now. Also characterized by Loyola University. So we're the home to Loyola University. About 80% of their campus is in the 49th Ward, while some is in the 48th Ward, just to the south of us. Not a lot of, no industrial commercial, a little bit of S&C Electric, but our commercial industries are mainly retail. So a lot of retail. We have some very robust and diverse retail corridors along Howard Street, Clark Street, Sheridan Road, Devon, Morse, Jarvis. So lots of little main streets that can give you a bit of a small town feel in an area that's got lots of tree-lined streets and a good fair amount of parks as well.
Well, that gives us a really good picture of the ward itself. Let's talk about now some of the people in your ward. What are the key issues that they're facing?
Sure. We've got, have long been a ward where a lot of people are first making their home in Chicago. So that's whether they're people moving from different cities in the United States, like myself. Rogers Park, the 49th Ward, was my first home in Chicago when I moved here in 2004. As a neighborhood that's historically more affordable than a lot of other neighborhoods in the city, especially on the north side of the city. with really good transit options. So we've got a Metra, we've got 4 red line stops, we've got, 3 major bus lines, an express bus line to downtown. So being well transit served makes it pretty easy for a lot of folks to get to and from where they need to go, work or school. We've got a lot of the college students as well that this might be the first neighborhood that they're exposed to in Chicago if they're not from here. And we're also the first home to a lot of new Americans. So along the
And
neighborhood of immigrants and refugees. So we have many refugees that are resettled here because of our good housing stock. A lot of family-sized apartments, right, and homes that can accommodate people who need, good, solid, nice, affordable housing. And as such, historically, another thing that characterizes our community is a lot of social service organizations. So, from immigrant and refugee organizations to organizations offering mental health and behavioral services, health clinics. We've got 4 federally qualified health clinics in our area. So, neighbors here have access to a lot of services, which also makes it a really nice place to live, especially for people who might need more access to that service. So we're very economically diverse and also racially and ethnically diverse.
what
So
is, are there some overriding issues though that are facing this diverse population?
sure. So because of all the diversity, right? Because of so many people from so many different places, um, we could dive into many very niche issues, but just like everyone else, affordable housing still kind of tops the list, right? Demand is always high. In this particular time period, over these last couple of years, we've seen the cost of living, especially for housing and rent, just soar. So that's challenging. I'd say another issue for neighbors in the 49th Ward are access to mental health services. So while we do have a lot of organizations here that serve our population, we do have we had a public mental health clinic that was closed here some years ago under the Rahm Emanuel administration. And over the last few years, we rank fairly high in calls for mental health emergencies and crisis. So still a high demand of people who are here who have need of those services and may not have access because there aren't public places. Other big issues here for people that touch everybody are environmental issues. So one, maybe it's the proximity to the lake. Um, Maybe it's some other factors, but we have had neighbors very much impacted by climate change, by impacts and differences we've seen in rising levels of Lake Michigan. We had, through that 2019-2020 storm season, really significant impacts with erosion along the
Hmm.
beachfront. And our beaches aren't just beaches. We have a lot of people, right, whose homes, apartments, and condos are very close to the lake. And the big changes that we've seen there over the last decade really have caused some significant challenges. And so we have a lot of discussions and a lot of interest here around what the city's doing around climate action, how we're preparing for this and what our environmental agenda should be.
Oh, that's very interesting. So I've got affordable housing, mental health services, and environmental issues. You'd say those would be the top issues.
Yes.
Okay. So when did you first join the city council and why did you decide to run? Do you have any other appointment?
So I ran and was elected in 2019. So May 20th will be the third anniversary, will be the end of my 3 years.
Mhm.
We do have 4-year terms, right, in city council. I am running for reelection, so hope to have another term, right? We'll have elections in February of 2023. And prior to running for this office, I had about a decade of experience in nonpartisan civic engagement, but had not previously run for political office before.
And do you have any other current employment or are you strictly
No, I
100%?
am a full-time alderperson. And to those colleagues of mine who do this with additional jobs, I don't know how they do it.
You're on several committees. Could you pick one of these and describe the kind of matters that come before that committee?
Sure, let's talk about housing. So I do serve on the Committee for Housing and Real Estate, a very active committee here in Chicago, and been excited to be a part of several pieces of legislation that we've attempted to move and some that we've passed. We've made some big changes in fair housing, making sure that people who are long-term renters have um, more fair notice, right? If somebody purchases their building or needs somebody to leave, maybe because of a rehab, maybe because they're changing it to a condo, maybe because they're moving in a family member, right? But making sure that Chicagoans have fair notice. So increasing some of our renters' rights, which again is a community that's 75% renters, very important to constituents here in the 49th Ward. Um, Worked with Jane Addams Senior Caucus when the public health emergency was declared for COVID to help strengthen protections for seniors in senior buildings. So the senior safety ordinance was something that we worked on together to give more agency so that seniors in senior apartment rental buildings had more guarantees from management that they were going to follow public health guidelines and give people a little more certainty about who was coming and going in their building with many concerns around COVID. And of course, we've pushed some reforms on our affordable requirements ordinance to help us increase the amount of affordable housing units that we can create all over the city of Chicago. So the ARO increasing the requirements to 20% for new developments, and also I think having and pushing some conversations that challenge aldermanic prerogative a little bit so that we can also expand access to affordable housing, not just in some neighborhoods, but in all of them across Chicago.
Oh, thank you. So you're fairly new to the city council. What, if any, changes would you like to see made in the operation?
Um, let's say where to start. Um, I would like to see some of our committees, as you were speaking of committees, I'd like to see some of our committees meet more regularly. We've had really important topics to discuss, and sometimes a city council committee is the only place where the public discourse and debate, right, guaranteed public access to discourse and debate over legislation or policies is going to be had. There are many conversations about policies, about practices that older people and city staff have that aren't in committees, but on some of our most important topics, whether it be around environmental issues or one of the things that comes to mind is education, right? While older people don't have specific authority over Chicago public schools, it's an issue that impacts and touches every Chicagoan, whether you have children or not. And our education committee has failed to meet on many occasions, even when myself and other older people have introduced legislation resolutions to have discussions about COVID protections, about what CPS is doing with federal funds, right? The ARPA fund. So we've got lots of questions that sometimes go unanswered. And I think that's a big thing that I would like to change and maybe formalizing a bit more when committees should meet so that we're not depriving the public or the representatives of the public of important conversations and debate that needs to be had.
That's very interesting. Now, one of the issues, obviously, that's facing the entire city of Chicago is gun violence.
Mhm.
We didn't talk about that before, but what are some of the actions that the city is taking to reduce gun violence? And do you think any of them have been or will be effective?
There's been there's been a big investments in a lot of programs, and I know that we've had initiatives targeting some of our neighborhoods and even smaller than the neighborhood designation, right? What are some of the blocks? What are some of the beats where we're seeing some of the highest levels of gun violence? And a lot of resources, both in police resources, but also most importantly, community service resources for violence interrupters, for trauma counselors, for mentors have been poured into these neighborhoods. And it's hard to say with some of these early figures what the impact of that has been. I think I saw this week that um, overall, the neighborhoods that the city has chosen to target with these additional programs is something like down 26% compared to this time last year in gun involved kind of incidents. But that's still a very short time, right? Statistically, we've also had pretty poor weather up until this point in the city. So it's hard to pinpoint a cause and effect. I can say that in my own neighborhood, where we certainly have issues with gun violence, though not nearly as high as other areas of the city, especially right now, not even the same as some of the downtown communities, right?
Mhm.
But we've had some great programs like Communities Partnering for Peace, which was formerly the ceasefire program, with kind of folks who might have been formerly involved in the criminal justice system, folks who have direct experience who are specifically there doing interventions, doing counseling, working out agreements to help kind of stem conflicts. And that's been really helpful here in Rogers Park in the 49th Ward. And then, of course, we also have a police department who's been really focusing on trying to get guns off the street. And I think they're doing a really good job of making that effort. And also, there's something broader than what the city can do, and even our state, where we have, I think, some great gun laws, right? But we need to find ways for our higher levels of government and for our neighboring states to do more to help us keep guns out of Illinois and to keep guns out of Chicago. So the last thing I'll say, some of the shootings that we have had this year in my ward, not a single one of them has been, quote unquote, gang related. They've been interpersonal conflicts,
Wow.
right? They've been interpersonal conflicts, two people who know each other get in a fight, someone's mad at somebody else, and someone shoots someone. So this isn't just criminally involved, right? Or criminally related. It's not tied to an armed robbery, right? It's not tied to that. It's people who need help. We've all been really stressed to the max through the pandemic. People who have access to guns, because we've just been opening up gun laws all over this country, and who are not finding other ways to resolve conflict and in anger, right, are using weapons against one another. It's really sad.
Huh, yeah. Well, let's change the topic now to go back to the city council. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Rule 41 allows the council to pass agenda items that aren't available to the public to see until after the meeting. And it's happening on a regular basis. This is because one of the provisions of Rule 41 allows the mayor and city departments to present directly to committees certain items, and they can bypass the clerk's office. So a number is not assigned, text is not posted on Legistar where the public can read it. Would you support a requirement to make direct introduction of items available with an assigned item number to the public, no less than 2 business days before the meeting?
Absolutely, I would. And that would benefit not just the public, but it would benefit city council. As to your point, there have been multiple occasions where an ordinance has been presented to us minutes before a committee starts, after the committee starts, right? Or where we then have a pause, and an ordinance, a substitute is created, right? In the middle of that break, and then it's represented. For those who follow city council meetings, but especially committee meetings, a frequent conversation that's come up in my time there are older people expressing frustration that we haven't had time to read this item. We haven't had time to review, and it is challenging. So I would be supportive of that. Absolutely.
Good to know. There's another issue that the league is interested in. Currently, when one candidate for mayor or alderman does not receive 50% plus one vote in the February election, the top two vote getters are forced into a runoff election. What, in your view, would about ranked choice voting be able to help determine the winner? Would you be in favor of that or not?
I am, and I've supported other efforts for ranked choice voting that have been ongoing in our state. I actually think that municipal elections, both aldermanic and city council elections, are a great example of where ranked choice voting could really help people. Sometimes, as I imagine, right, we may have in upcoming city council elections, there are so many candidates, right? That voters' choice can really be diluted. You can end up with a lot of money, right, in these campaigns that also can really skew things. I think ranked choice voting, one, gives people, voters, more choice, right, especially in a runoff situation, instead of coming down to this kind of sudden death, right?
Right.
And it can be complicated for voters.
And I would imagine expensive
Yeah.
for both the city to run a second election
Mhm.
and for the candidates to campaign a second time.
As having only been a candidate and run one campaign, I was very grateful to not have to go to a runoff because it is not unusual for the runoff election to cost you almost as much as the first election.
Mhm.
So think of it doubling like costs, and these are, of course, cost to a candidate, but those candidate costs are coming from voters, right? Their donations, their support from voters that we could be using on something else.
Now here's another question: how the league could help you if we wanted to support one of your initiatives, what steps would you recommend that we take?
So I do put out a weekly newsletter where generally we share all kinds of updates. A lot of them are very ward specific infrastructure updates, small business, school, community aid. But at least once a month, I have legislative updates and kind of what's happening in city council. I do have two pieces of legislation that I'm working on as an example. The Anjanette Young Ordinance, looking
Mhm.
to ban no-knock warrants and make some reforms to our current warrant and raid practices in the city of Chicago, and also bring Chicago home, which is a resolution that we're working on to have a ballot referendum, right? So letting voters decide to weigh in on whether we should increase an incremental increase on the real estate transfer tax, which is for sales of homes $1 million or more, to provide a direct funding source for homelessness prevention services in the city of Chicago, which we currently do not have. We don't have dedicated funding for it. But so we share things like that. I would ask people reach out to my office. Generally, we have committees and coalitions that are working on this legislation with me. So if you're looking to get involved on one of those issues or something else that you see me talking about or that you've heard from people in the 49th Ward, reach out to my office and let me know you want to engage. I'm happy to I return calls and emails.
Thank you. Finally, what are things that you might like to see get done or at least started during the remainder of your term, which ends in 2023?
It's a long list, Judy, and I'm going to be as quick as possible. So I would like to pass those two pieces of legislation that I was just speaking about. We've been working on trying to do a unique community wealth building project at the two city-owned lots at Howard and Ashland. So the Howard Ashland Corridor Development Initiative. You can find info on that on my website. We've worked with community members, Metropolitan Planning Council, and are now working with Northside Community Resources to, one, develop a building with affordable housing, but not just develop a building, but figure out how we really have a development that gives financial benefit to residents along Howard Street and north of Howard. So that won't be constructed by the end of my term, but we're really close to finalizing kind of the pieces of how it leaves my office and starts going. And then we've had an aldermanic youth advisory council, so looking to continue that. We're starting our second session with our youth advisory council this summer. and also looking to um, work on some things for our schools. So we helped Kilmer Elementary succeed in their application for an international baccalaureate program. So they've been approved for kind of the pre-IB track. So bringing some special programs to Rogers Park Schools, which we hadn't been granted in 25 years. And we've also are looking to make some more capital improvements at Sullivan High School, notably to try and bring the swimming pool that's been out of commission for over a decade back into use for both the students and the community.
Interesting. Well, Alderwoman Hadden, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been very enlightening, and we think you're off to a great start with the council. I want to remind everyone who's watching that a link to this program will be found on the Chicago League's website, and everyone who registered for today's program who's not a league member will receive an email with the link, along with an invitation to join the league. Next week, again on Thursday, this time it'll be the 19th, we'll be interviewing Alderman Tom Tunney, and we hope you will register to join us for that event. Thank you so much.